Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we'll be painting a cougar in pastels. I painted this one on an 8 by 10 and this is the anthracite Clairefontaine pastel matte, and anthracite, that's the name of the color. It's a very dark gray. It doesn't look as light as it does on the video here. It looks a lot lighter on the video, so it's actually darker in person. It's much grainier than the other pastel matte colors for some reason. I don't know why. And after having painted a full piece on the anthracite, my opinion is I like it less than the other colors of pastel matte. I just don't like the graininess that comes with this darker color. I've read some comments on social media from some people that do love this color, and everybody has their preferences. So you might like it, and that's okay. You need to work with what you like. I just prefer something that has less graininess to it, just so that the pastels flow smoother. I don't like to see that breakage, the graininess in my pencil strokes. And I find with the anthracite, you see too much of the graininess left over after. Despite all the pushing in and smoothing out, you still see a lot of graininess, too much for my taste. So I'm starting this one by working on the left side of the screen on the eye, and I started by outlining in black, and then I drew in the pupil and I put in my little white spot right away, and I worked with a grayish green as well as I'm going to use some golds in the eyes as well. So I just want to get that down. I'm just going to keep working that eye. I'm just going to outline in black. Whenever possible, I like starting my outlines for the eyes in black. It just, it's easier, and you get the really crisp outline, and then you can work your colors around that. And there's that kind of grayish green. It's almost like a very light olive green. So if you don't have Caran d'Ache, if you do have an olive green in your pencils, you can use that. If you don't have an olive green, what I sometimes do is I take a green and I kind of mix it a little bit with the gray and maybe a bit of a gold, and then it gives me my perfect olive green tone, golden olive green. So you don't need to panic if you don't have that exact color. You can blend a few colors together to get something similar. And remember, whenever you paint, if you don't have the exact color, that's okay. If you can improvise and get something good enough or close enough, that's awesome. You're that much more ahead as an artist because you've used your creativity to come up with something that is close enough to it, and that's just a really good thing to be able to do as an artist. Now, to get my outline, my sketch down onto the pastel mat, what I did this time is I drew my sketch on my page, and on the back of my sketch I outlined with white pastel stick, and then I took that and I taped my sheet over my pastel mat where I wanted to place my cougar, and then I took a pencil and I drew over my rough sketch, and this transferred my outline. So if you'll be using the line art that the $6 level gets with this, you could just take your line art, outline the back with a pastel stick, and then place it over top of your pastel mat or whatever surface you'll be working on, and just draw over your outline again, and that'll transfer the pastel onto the surface, and then you could just start working from your outline this way. Because the pastel mat is a dark color, using a graphite paper is not possible in this situation. It just wouldn't show through enough. So now back to the eye. After I filled in the inside of the eye with the olive green color, I outlined again with my reddish brown pencil from Gioconda, and it's the same pencil I'm using right now. So whatever brown pencil you have, if you have a reddish brown pencil, bonus, use that. And now I'm taking a darker gold pencil and I'm just going to start roughly sketching out some little lines to mark my hairs and trying to follow the direction of the hair as I see them on my reference. And I'm trying to lay down some of the darker patterns as well, just so I get my placement. I don't want to lose the patterns and where things are going to go. So wherever I can outline the darkest areas, I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. Now, if you're new to my videos, welcome. And what I do want to say is that I work in layers. I work in several layers. And the reason I do this is because this is how you achieve excellent depth in your paintings as well as realism. And I always tell everybody that I work with a minimum of 3 colors per section. So minimum of 3 and often more. So I never limit paintings to just a couple of colors because then work tends to look flat. So I always layer and work with several colors, and this helps me achieve depth and realism. So for example, if you look at this little section of hair that I started working on top of the eye, I've only basically used 2 colors here, gold and brown. And if I would leave it just like that, it would look pretty flat. If I did the whole cat this way, it would look lifeless and flat. So I want to use several colors. And now to block in the rest, I decided to go with pan pastels. And that color is, let me see here, that's the raw umber. And I'm finding that the pan pastels help me lay down a really nice thin layer that I can work over top of. I used to work primarily by laying down my first layer with pastel sticks, but since I've discovered pan pastels, I like to use them for my first layer, and then I built other layers over top of that. And now I'm using a cream colored Carbothello Stabilo, and I'm going to start outlining some of the highlights over top of the eye, the lighter colors in the fur, and again, always trying to be mindful of the direction of the hair. And I find despite trying to keep some nice points on my pencils, it was hard to get nice smooth lines because the paper is so grainy. It's just grainy, and it just, if you look at each stroke really close up, you can see like a lot of tiny little breaks in each stroke because of the graininess of the paper. So this kind of helped make really fine lines a little bit difficult to do on this paper. And I apologize for this being out of camera range, but I'm just outlining my dark areas. Wherever I know there will be a dark area, this is what I try and block in first. Most of the rough sketch that I put down, I will try and outline the darkest parts of my sketch where I know it'll be dark. That's what I basically want to try and outline, except for the outline itself. And now I'm just coming in again with that raw umber from the pan pastels. I find the pan pastels laying down a basic underlaying like this or underpainting, it really helps to speed up the painting time. Mind you, this still took about 4.5 hours to paint, give or take. It still helps to speed up the time because you can cover an area a lot more quickly than you can with traditional pastel sticks or pencils. And again, I apologize for this being out of camera range. I thought it was completely within the camera range, but I'm just starting to use some brown again, just in my darker sections. I'm going to speed this up since we can't see it. So I'll just go through this really quickly since we can't see it. And we're back to normal speed and within camera range. And I'm just outlining that little dark patch above his eye, just using black and brown pencils. Just want to make sure I get that little mark in there. and starting to detail tiny little hairs around the eye. And this is a very dark brown. It looks a little bit lighter on the camera, but it's a really dark brown. If this was on a lighter paper, you would really see how dark it is. But because it's on a very dark paper, it's also looking light. So always be mindful of the color of your background as you're working, as it will affect the color that you see. I always, when I paint with oils, I always tone my canvas for that reason. I painted a nice mid-tone, and it helps me to better interpret my colors and my value range. So there, our ear is back within camera range. And I've got a beige color from my Caran d'Ache pencils here. And again, going in the direction of the hairs. These are longer hairs on the ears, so I want to make sure that my strokes are longer. It's always important to pay attention to your strokes. Are the hairs short or are the hairs long? If they're short, use short little strokes. If they're long, use longer strokes. And try and overlap them and crisscross them while trying to observe the pattern and the shape they're going in, and try and stay as true to that as possible. You don't have to paint every hair in accurately or perfectly. That's not what painting is about, but it's just getting a good interpretation and just trying to get it as realistically as possible without having to do every single little hair perfectly as seen on the reference, because that would just be, in my opinion, completely crazy. Even Robert Bateman always says he never paints every single hair, he just creates the illusion that he's painted every single hair. And I'm just going to outline the back of that ear with a black pencil. And if you're new to my videos and newer to Pastels, the sheet I'm holding under my hand is a glassine sheet. I use these to ship my paintings. They help protect my paintings. And I also use them while I'm working. I rest my hand and my arm on them, because if I don't, what would happen is I could potentially transfer body oils onto the paper, and then this creates areas or spots where the pastel won't stick that well. And I hear this a lot of time from people starting to work with pastels. They'll complain about certain papers and say that the pastels just aren't sticking for them. This is probably why. They've probably transferred body oils from their skin onto their surface. So always try and keep something in between your skin and the surface that you're working on, no matter what surface you're working on. If you don't have pastel matte, if you don't have glassine, try using a sketching paper. Just pull a paper out of your pad. It's acid free, so it should be completely safe to rest on your working surface. Try and use acid-free things as much as possible when you're working. You don't want to compromise the paper. So here I have my reddish brown pencil again, just adding more color. Like I said earlier, I always want to add a minimum of 3 colors, if not more. And this just creates more depth, and it makes a painting more visually appealing. It makes it look more realistic. Otherwise, if we don't have enough color on our paper, enough variations of color, our work looks flat. And now I have my cream colored pencil, and I'm going to work over top of those colors that I've already laid down. So if you're new to my videos, again, I usually tend to start from dark to mid-tone to light in that order. And that's how I build up my layers as well as build up light. And again, I'm just following the direction of the hairs. I'm going to start adding more texture to the hair on the ear. Little separations in color, and this creates interesting patterns. Every once in a while, I like to use my fingers and just push down the pastel and kind of blend it in a bit. It softens it and it also pushes it deep into the pastel mat, especially this one because it's so grainy. I really need to push down every once in a while. I'm going to continue just highlighting some areas around the eye. And I'm zooming in just a little bit so you can see better. So I'm just going to keep working those colors, adding layers, adding hairs, always following the direction that they're growing in. And just tiny little marks here because they're just short little hairs on the forehead. So I want to make sure I'm not using long strokes. And I want to take my time and go slow. I don't want to just go really fast through this and be impatient with it because then I might mess up. So patience is important when you're working with small details like this. Now I'm going to start adding hairs underneath and just start building up under there and adding details. And this is my beige pencil again. And these hairs under the eye kind of curve upwards. And then as you get down, going down on the bottom of the cheek, they start going downwards and around. So always be mindful of the direction they're growing in. And here they're curving upwards and then they start going sideways and then down. Pushing that deep in there. And even though I rubbed hard on that, you can still see the lines. That's how grainy this paper is. And I'm using my reddish brown Gioconda pencil. You can use whatever brown pencil you have. It doesn't have to be exact. And alternating with my black and just trying to get those details in. When you use the black this way, it makes the lighter colors really pop. And that little brown strip under the eye, that's your lower lid, so you want to make sure that you don't cover that up with hairs. And I'm taking a mid-tone gray pencil and I'm just gently outlining a reflection. Because the lower lid is moist, it is reflecting back light. So I'm just using a mid-tone gray for that. And that's it, it's as easy as that, just a tiny little line. And I'm just going to go right to the top of the head now and just start laying down some browns. There's a little dark patch just in the center of the forehead or on top of the head there. So I'm going to use my black, and then as we go along, I will be layering hairs over top of that. I'm just going to add more black here and there where I feel it's needed. And the same with my cream colored pencil. Now this is a gold colored pencil, and I'm just going to start penciling in some fine hairs on top of the head. And you can still see some brown showing through. I'm just going to add a bit more black. I wanted it a little bit darker. The brown wasn't dark enough, so going back over that with a bit of black. And this is a dark brown pencil here. The tip on the screen looks black, but it's dark brown. And I'm going to go over top of that again with my gold. When I chose the anthracite paper to start painting this, I had the intention of keeping this as the background and not painting in a background. I just wanted to see what it would look like. I did eventually end up painting it at the very end. I didn't want to leave it as is. I just felt it didn't look finished without painting in a background. Some people do like to leave the color plain and showing through and just leave the pastel matte that way, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's all preference. It's all personal preference. I just personally preferred finishing the background and painting it in. So I will be showing that as well at the end. I just felt it didn't look complete. And an interesting bit about the reference photo used for this painting, I took a trip to Banff and Lake Louise several years back. I think this was 2015, and up on top of the mountain at Lake Louise, there's a tourist little museum type thing, and there was some taxidermy, and this cougar was there. And so, yes, this photo reference came from taxidermy rather than an animal in a zoo or something like that. And apparently this cougar had, they found it had died while catching prey. It caught the prey and it wouldn't let go, and they both fell over a cliff, and this is how they found the cougar. So they took it to a taxidermist and had it put in or installed at the museum or the tourist center. It's a sad story, but it's nature, and these things do happen in nature. So it's just one of those things that, as ugly and brutal as it is, it's just life. It's the cycle of life. So that's the interesting little tidbit about this reference photo. So I'm just going to keep layering those hairs. And this is a gold pencil, a dark gold pencil. And I'm just going to keep working down, and the hairs here are smaller, so my strokes are getting smaller and smaller as I get down lower towards the bridge of the nose. And I just push that pencil in there, deep into the pastel matte. So when you're making little lines, try and crisscross, overlap, and just don't make them all perfectly straight because it won't look natural after. And I'm just gonna mark in a little dark area here with my reddish brown pencil, and just start adding a little bit more brown just to add more interest. This is going to help us create depth. And here's that beige pencil again, and I'm just going to start highlighting little hairs here and there. Trying to be mindful of the patterns I see. There are lighter areas, darker areas. So I want to try and recreate those little patterns as closely as possible. And again, going to my dark brown, and this is helping to add contrast between the ear and the temple. There, that just gave it a little bit more definition. And I'm going to keep extending that beige color past the cream color that's lighter. It kind of extends the light color and blends it out into the darker colors. And again, with this layer, as I'm going down, my strokes are getting shorter and shorter as the hairs are getting shorter and shorter as you go down the bridge of the nose. And back up on the ear here, just adding another layer of fur. These hairs are a bit longer than the ones we just painted on the bridge of the nose. So always pay attention to the length of the hair. As you look at an animal, the hair length is different depending on what body part you're looking at. And I keep alternating between my lights and my darks, adjusting as I go along. Don't think just because you've already laid down your darks you can't go back and add more. You can always go back and add more as you work. With anything you're working on, any color, you can always go back and readjust whatever you feel needs adjusting. And even after your painting is done, I usually let it sit there for a couple of days. I look at it under different lighting, night light, daylight, sunny days, cloudy days, and then I look at it to see if there's anything that bugs me, if I want to change anything. You know, don't rush to call a painting finished just because you think you've put down the last stroke. Very often, when you stop and you look at it for a couple of days, you will notice something that you would like to go back and adjust. So never be afraid of doing that. And again, using the pan pastels and a little cosmetic sponge or eye makeup sponge. And as I said before, you don't need to buy these from the art store. It's the same kinds that you would buy in a cosmetic store, department store. So you could buy these bulk by the bag for much cheaper if you buy them, let's say at Walmart or your local drugstore. Trying to decide which color to go with here. I'm going to darken up that brown a little bit with the black. I felt the brown just wasn't dark enough. It's not really black, and it's a very dark brown, almost black, so just combine the two. And now I'm back with my beige pencil, again working the hairs, just adding another layer, curving them where they need to be curved, and following the direction of the hair as well as the size. They get shorter and shorter as you get closer to the nose. And I'm always looking at my reference photo to see if I'm headed in the right direction, making sure I'm on target. I'm going to go ahead and pencil in that darker area. the darker patterns right away. I don't want to lose them as I keep working on my cougar. This is my black pencil. And now I'm taking out a dark brown pencil and I'm going to start laying down some little dark brown hairs. And I'm just going to go everywhere I feel dark brown is needed. And I'm just going to keep working with that, just creating another layer. And once all the layers are down, a lot of these colors still show through, and this is how you get depth. It's going to adjust those hairs. I've mentioned this in other videos, but I'll repeat it again because I think it's a really good thing to know, and just in case you won't be watching the videos in question. But if you want to know if you're on track and making sure everything's in proper proportion, the way you can look at your painting is you can either take a picture and compare, do a side by side with the reference photo, and I always do that. But what I also like to do is squint every once in a while as I paint. I step back, I look at my painting, I squint. If anything is off, if my values are off, if something is crooked, it'll scream out at me. And also, I like to get up, and I have a very large mirror in my studio. It's permanently up on my wall. And when I want to really see if I'm on track, if something is off, I take my painting, I get up, and I look at it in the mirror. And by looking at it in the mirror, if something is off, if something is crooked, if things are not lined up properly, or your proportions are not right, this will tell you. You will see it in the mirror. It's just going to scream out at you, and you will be able to know where you went wrong after and fix it. And I also flip my paintings sideways and upside down and have a look at them in while they're facing me in different directions, and this also helps me to see if anything's off in my paintings. So always do this with your artwork, and you'll see that you'll improve, because if something's off, you will know by looking at your work in different interesting ways like this. And so here I've just been applying my cream colored Carbothello, just putting down that lighter coloration under his eye. And again, I'm just mindful of the direction the hair is growing in, as well as the length of the strokes. And I'm going to keep adding some little bits of white here and there, just defining the texture and the fur even more. So when you're layering this way, not only are you creating depth and realism, you're also adding texture to your fur, because those colors underneath are still poking through. I'm not making little cream colored marks everywhere either with this. I'm just going and placing my marks in random spots, trying to replicate the pattern as I see it on my reference. So it's not everywhere, it's just little bits here and there, and these little bits here and there will give me the texture that I'm going for. So now I'm using the Payne's Gray Pan Pastels here. This side of the cougar's face is in a shadowed area, so I want to make it a little bit darker than the other side of his face. So I'm going to lay down darker colors and just layer over top of those, and they'll just give me that slight subtle shadow that I'm looking for. It's not that much darker, it's just very subtle, but it is in the shadows. And I'm mixing that Payne's Gray with just a hint of black. I wanted it just a little bit darker. I didn't want it black, but I didn't want it too light either. I'm coming in with a dark gray pencil here and just laying down a bit of the dark gray on this side in the shadowed area, just to add a little bit of a cool tone. I also want to make sure that I completely cover up my white lines. I don't want any of that showing through by the time this piece is done. And again, I'm just following the direction of the hairs, and they're going a little bit more sideways, and then they're going to start slightly curving downwards. So pay attention to that. And so now I'm using a warm gray pencil, and I'm starting to layer over top of what I've already just laid down. Because the cougar's fur color is a warm color, I still want to depict some of that warmth even though it's in a cooler shadowed area. So I'm kind of having a play between the warms and the cools. And I'm going to speed this up just as I put down this layer here. We can still see what I'm doing, but it'll just speed up the tedious process of laying down the hairs. And as I said before in other videos, when you're working with putting hair details like this, dig deep for patience if you're not a patient type. I'm not a patient person, so for years I've been working on my patience, and it's something I work on all the time. So it requires a lot of patience. Digging deep to find that patience is going to allow you to create beautiful details in your paintings, which will give you really beautiful paintings in the end. So I just laid down a little bit of pan pastels down there also, and I'm just continuing my layer of gray. Again, just following the direction of the hair. And here's a lighter gray again. It's another warm gray, but it's even lighter than the previous one. Every layer gets lighter and lighter. And now I'm coming in with my cream colored pencil. Even though it's in a shadowed area, It will be blended right in, so it's not going to come across as cream, but I still need that lighter color there without it being too gray. So I'm just, again, layering all these colors together, and they're still going to blend together nicely to give me a shadowed area in this portion of the face. I'm just going to go ahead and darken it up just a little bit with some dark brown. And now I'm going back up on my face, and I'm going to make little adjustments to my hairs. I constantly adjust as I go along. Some people paint and they're done with this section and they move on. I'm not like that. I keep going back continuously and adjust. And I'm just going to lay down some dark brown in this section. It's a darker section next to the muzzle, next to the nose. It's on the muzzle, next to the nose. Start laying down some black in the nostrils. I don't want to lose the shape of the nostrils or the nose. So I want to make sure I lay that down before I continue anywhere else here. I need to work around this black outline, so I want it down first, and then I can work around it. Noses I find so tricky. They contain all these weird shapes and different various colors, so they're very hard to work with. Be patient with yourself when it comes to noses, and just keep working them till you get them right, because they are tricky. They always feel so strange when you work on them. So I've outlined the top portion of the nose with a dark brown pencil, and now I'm going to start filling in with a lighter burnt sienna color, and this will just serve as a base. The nose is not perfectly pink and it's not really orange. It's kind of like a combination of pink, orange, and brown. So I want to make sure I layer enough colors to try and get as accurate a color as possible. So with my baby finger, I'm pushing that pastel in. Even though it's a small area, it's a little tricky, so be careful so you don't smudge black everywhere, but still try and push it in. I decided it was easier to just take out the blending stump and use that to blend it and push it in. And it's still looking weird here. It's still feeling strange. I'm just blocking in. I'm not too worried about the shape at this point. I just want to get some color down, and I'm going to fix the proportions and adjust everything towards the end. Right now I'm more concerned with laying down color and getting my color down right. The nose is darker as you get to the bottom of it, so I want to make sure that I paint it darker as I get closer towards the bottom. And I'm also going to use these dark colors to help work the curves that are found everywhere in the nose. So use the play of those darks and lights in your favor to create shapes. Dark colors recede, so this will help you to give shape to objects such as this nose here. And now I'm going to put down a layer of brown just to adjust my color. I don't want it to be that intense orange that you see right now. It's a little too bright. We want to tone that down. And now you can see just by adding that layer of light brown on there, it completely changed the color and we don't have this bright orangey feel to it anymore. And this is a reddish brown. I'm just, again, outlining my little darker area up on top of the nose and adjusting the nostrils as well as the little shadowed area and the crease between the two nostrils. And I'm just going to keep playing with my colors until I'm satisfied with the values as well as the shape. My lighter areas, my darker areas. And this is my black pencil, and I'm again just adjusting my nostrils, and I'm going to keep doing this and fine tuning as I go along until I'm completely satisfied with how my nose turns out. Using this reddish brown colored pencil, just in certain areas, it's also helping with my values on the nose, some medium toned areas, and it's also helping to shape my nose. It's helping me with those curves that I was speaking about. So it's going from darker to mid-tones to light. And it's just giving me less of a strong or hard transition between the darks and lights. And so I'm just adjusting my colors again, and I'm just trying to keep it a little bit lighter over on top of the nose. And now I've got my cream carbothello pencil, and I'm just going to lay down tiny little hairs that sit on the very top of the nose. And these hairs are lighter than the rest of the hairs that sit on the nose. So I'm just going right for the lightest color right away. With the same cream colored pencil, I'm just going to place tiny little dots on the very top of the nose just to indicate some light being reflected on there. It gives a moist appearance. I don't want to put too much of this. Too much would be overkill. So always know to not put too much of a good thing, which is easy to do with light and reflective areas and anything that's being reflected. It's fun to do, and you see such a drastic change, so much life come to a piece that natural tendency is to want to put more of it, want to put a lot of it. Resist that urge. Just remember, less is more. And I just tap that, push it down into the paper. This helps to smooth out the little marks as well, so they're not as harsh. I don't want just harsh pencil marks. I want everything to look really nice and soft on the nose. And I keep refining and adjusting as I go along, playing with my colors, adjusting my shapes. I'm going to keep doing this until I'm satisfied with the whole appearance of the nose. And now my nose is pretty much done. I will adjust it again later, but now I'm going to move on to the top of the head again, as well as the bridge of the nose, and I'm going to continue working the details in the hairs on these parts. And I'm going in with my dark brown pencil, and I'm just going to lay down a darker base over top of what I put down with the pan pastels. And I'm going to keep working the rest of it with the pan pastels. If I had a dark brown here, which I don't in the pan pastels, I ordered a set, but dark brown was not in there, and I'm just going to have to wait until my budget increases for more art supplies. But I would have laid down a very dark brown base had I had the dark brown pan pastels. So if you do have the dark brown pan pastels on the bridge of the nose, go ahead and use them. Just on the bridge of the nose or areas that you see that are darker, you can do that. And I'm just going to keep applying the raw umber pan pastels using my little makeup sponge. There's a darker section on the nose, so I want to make sure I get that down with the dark brown, as well as this little pattern here above his eye. I'm just going to get down those dark areas marked out right away, just like we did on the other side, just so we can proceed with the layering. By placing down those darker areas right away before doing anything else, we use these kind of as little guideposts or markers that help guide us as we paint, and it lets us know if we're on track or if we're off. And we're just going to speed this up to double time. We're just laying down some dark hairs, just making short little marks. And they get shorter again as we go down. And I'm just going to zoom in now as we're going to start working on the eye. Once the other eye is on, then the whole thing really starts coming to life. Right now we just have bits and pieces. So again, I'm going to start off by outlining with black. And pretty much half the eye is in a shadow, so we're going to be using a lot of darker colors on this eye with very little of the green and gold. And again, I'm just going to lay down a foundation with the pan pastels before I can continue the bottom part of the eye and cheek. So before we start adding any hairs there, we'll just lay down a very thin coat of pan pastels. And that's the raw umber color again. This was a dark gold color that I started in with. And now I have a reddish brown pencil. I just wanted a little bit of a reddish brown tinge to it. And I'm going to extend my pupil down. And again, this is a lighter gold. I want to try and get it just a little bit lighter in there. And it's a little tricky because the eye is so small. Just going to use a blending stump to push that in there. Push it into the paper and try and smooth things out. And the pupil's a little bit off here, but don't worry about that. That could be fixed later. Right now I'm just concerned with getting the colors down in there as well as the proper amount of light. Oh, my lead was broken here. So I switched pencil. I hate when leads break on Caran d'Ache pencils. They're so expensive. It's such a waste and they just break so easily. I love the pencils. I don't like the fuss that they cause. They're very delicate because they're such a soft pastel, right? Which is what makes them so beautiful to work with, but it also makes them very easily breakable. So I'm just going down with some brown in there, reddish brown. And I'm going to finish outlining with the black. And I'm going to make some more adjustments on my nose. I'm using a darker cream colored here. This is my Conte pencil. So it's harder than the rest of the pastel pencils. It's a really dry, hard pencil. But I love the cream color and I use it a lot. As you could tell, I've worn out my pencil. It's time for a new one. So I'm just going to keep making little adjustments on my nose as I go along. I'm just using very light pressure here as I'm tapping and just gently smoothing things out. I just want to soften everything. I don't want to like completely smudge things off. So just Very light pressure. I use either my baby finger because it's a small area or my ring finger. Your ring finger is always your weakest finger. So for this reason, whenever I want to use very light pressure, I always work with my ring finger. I'm going to work around my nostrils with a burnt sienna pencil, trying to keep it a little bit more red around the edge of the nostrils. And the reason for this is because very often between your lightest parts and your darkest parts, you have more intense color. So this is what I'm producing here. More intense reddish, a more intense reddish tone around the outer edge of the nostrils. And this gives us that natural transition between the darks and the lights. And I'm just adjusting my highlights again. I get them just right without going overboard with them. Just making sure I have those lighter areas properly drawn in. And now with my white pastel pencil, I'm just going to put just a few little dots in, not too much. Again, like I said before, less is more. Just a few little dots here and there, and tap them in, and that's it. And again, on this side, just a few little dots, not much, just gently tap and smooth it out. And now I'm just going to adjust my nostrils. Nostrils are tricky. So be patient with yourself and just keep working it. That's the beauty of pastels. You can keep working it until you get it right. So long as you don't have too many thick layers underneath. This is why we like to work with thinner layers. This way you can keep building them up for quite a while before your paper is saturated with pastel. I just want to adjust some of the black on my eye here too. I'm going to keep working the shape around the eye. This is a brown pencil, by the way. Just getting a brown underlayer, and there will be lighter colored hairs going over top of that. I just want to keep adjusting my color as well as the shape of my eye here. Trying to get the right balance of light. This here's my olive green pencil. It is a little big here. We're going to fix that after. I'm just trying to get the color in there, so I'm not too worried about the shape right now. I'll correct that later and make the eye a little bit smaller so that it's better proportioned with the other eye. This is a Conte burnt sienna pencil. It's a little intense in the red department. I just wanted to try to see if it would make much of a difference, but you could use whatever reddish brown pencil you have or burnt sienna pencil that you have. If you don't have the brands of pencils that I work with, that's perfectly fine. Just try and work with what you have. There's no need to buy new supplies. Most sets have an adequate amount of colors that you can work with. So there's no need to go out and get exactly what I'm using unless you want to, but it's not necessary. Try and work with what you have. There's a little bit of brown under the iris. I want to make sure I get that in there. It's not just a solid, not the iris, I mean the pupil. It's not just a solid black pupil going down. There's more brown as it tapers off. So make sure that it doesn't, you don't end it off with hard black edges. You want it to end off brown around the pupil, and then it changes to your goldish green. And this will give you a softer looking eye rather than having these hard black edges inside. I'm just going to play with my shadow here, correct the shape of my eye. So just by using the black like this, we've already changed the shape and made it a little bit smaller, so now it's more in proportion to the other eye on the other side. So again, just trying to make sure I get that brown down underneath the pupil. Be careful not to contaminate your white dot also, your reflection. Try and keep it white so you don't muddy it up. If you don't feel brave enough to use your baby finger, use the blending stump or any other blending tool. And I'm just going to mark down some of the darker patterns below the eye. And still adjusting my shape with the black and as well as the inner corner of the eye. And now this is a mid-tone gray pencil, and I'm just gonna gently line the rim of the lower lid just to give us a nice little reflection on there. And this helps to bring your eye to life. And now we're going to start working some lighter colored hairs. Keep building our layers on top of the head. I'm just going to add a little bit more of a deeper burnt sienna reddish brown up there. You can use any burnt sienna that you have. This was a deeper color, so I just wanted to see what it would look like in my gold. It's not necessary to use that if you don't have one. As you can see, sometimes I'm all over the page. As I work, I tend to notice things and then I jump there and adjust them and then I go back. I feel if I don't get to something right away, when I see something, I'll forget about it and I won't get back to it later. So I like to get it in there as soon as possible. And so I'm going to continue now with building layers on my head. And I'm alternating between a few colors, from brown to gold to my beige. If I see I need a lighter color to define a pattern and texture, I'll jump to the lighter color just so I don't lose that pattern, and then I'll work around it. I didn't find my browns deep enough here, so I'm just taking out a black pencil. I'm going over that brown area, just making it a little bit more intense with the darks. So the black is helping me do this. I'm just going to continue outlining my darker patterns also. Once the darker patterns are in, I'll be able to start playing more with the lighter colors. And now with my darker gold, I'm going to start laying down some short little hairs again. The hairs on top of the head are a lot shorter than they are mid-forehead and above the eye. So I want to make sure I just make short little strokes. And this is where it gets repetitive. And it's just a process of layering hair, so I'm going to speed it up just a little bit. It's the exact same thing we did on the other side. Again, it's just strokes following the direction of the hairs, and we're going to lighten up our colors as we go along. And these are just short little nicks as I get down on the bridge of the nose, just very short strokes. I don't want any hard lines, or sorry, any long lines. And even on the very top, try and get down just little dots if you can. Every once in a while, I just push the pastel in. Again, as I get on the side of the nose here, I'm mindful of the size of the hairs. They're very short hairs, as well as the direction of the hair. And they're just short little hairs in the middle of these two little dark patches here. So I just put down just a few strokes just to indicate a few hairs. I'm going to speed this up again just as I am working those hairs. Again, it's just hairs going in the direction that they're growing in. I'm just building up lighter layers. This is my beige colored pencil. And again, just short little nicks. Push them in once in a while. These tiny little hairs on the bridge of the nose curve downwards too as you go down, so be mindful of that. And over here, they're curling upwards. Then as we go down, they start going more sideways, and then they're going to start curving downwards also. And just short little nicks. And now I'm going to start penciling in around the eye. Again, just short little hairs following the direction. I know I'm repeating myself. And we're going to build up color under the eye also. And again, I'm being mindful of the direction of the hair and paying attention to those little spots where they start curving in different directions. Very important. That's why I keep repeating it. By using these curves, it's going to help us shape everything, so be very mindful of that. So I'm just using tiny, tiny little strokes here, just kind of hitting the paper with the pencil, using firm pressure. If you make a spot that's too thick, just wipe it off. And if that doesn't help, just go over it again with your darker color, then just make another mark. And I'm continuing that layer of lighter color over on this side as well. And this is just my beige pencil. And I do go over some of the black area just to have little hairs that overlap over that darker spot, that darker stripe on the side of the muzzle. If I just stop where the darkness or the black edge starts, it's not going to look natural. It'll just leave you with a hard edge that looks a little strange. So make sure you overlap the hairs. And the same with the black pencil. I want the black hairs to overlap other hairs as well. So I'm just going to put some in just random areas, not everywhere, not too many, just little random hairs here and there. And I'm going to start outlining my mouth before I start working any of the hairs in that section, because a lot of the hairs will be overlapping over the mouth. So we want to make sure we get that in first, and then everything else will be built up over top of that. And now I pulled out my warm gray pencil, and I'm just going to start outlining a darker spot on the muzzle. I want to make sure I leave this a little bit darker because it's going to give curvature to my muzzle after I put in my whiter areas, my lighter areas. I want to make sure I keep it dark here. So I'm just going to play around with my colors till I'm satisfied. And now I'm jumping back to the top of the head. And the reason I jumped back here is because I had taken a break after painting that last section, and when I went back I just immediately started on the top of the head. So we're just going to work on layering lighter colors on top of this now. Again, I want to make sure some of those hairs overlap the darker area so that it looks more natural. I want some of the darker hairs overlapping the lighter hairs, and as well as lighter hairs overlapping darker areas. So you'll keep adjusting as you go along to make sure that you have that natural overlapping. I'm just going to extend my underlayer with the pan pastels. And once that's down, then we'll be able to keep building layers. And I'm just going to work that little dark spot above the nose or on the side of the nose. And once that dark spot's in, then I'll be able again to start layering some lighter hairs over top of that. I just want to make sure I get that in. And I don't want to neglect that little dark area. A dark stripe on the side of his muzzle. So I'm just laying down my black. And I'm going to keep layering on this part of the muzzle also. I want to make sure I get some dark areas, even though I'll be going white over top of that. There are little dark areas underneath that are more of a brown tone, so I got those down. And now that they're in, I could start with my cream Carbothello pencil. There are dark hairs up on top, on that top part of the face, so I want to make sure I get that in. I don't want to neglect that. There's a blend of various colors of hairs. There's lighter hairs and darker hairs, so I just want to make sure I get those in. And now with my brown pencil, I'm just going to keep layering on this side. Just making sure I get it dark enough so that we understand that this part of the face will be slightly in the shadow area. I wanted a slightly darker value here, so I'm going in and just putting it darker using black and brown, and now I can layer over top of that. When I paint with oils or acrylics, it's basically the same process that I use. I layer, and I started painting with oils when I was 15 years old, I think. Yeah, 15. I think I was 15. And this is how I've always painted. I've always painted in many layers. So as an oil painter, I've been trained to work in layers. Well, I haven't been trained. I haven't had any formal training, but all of my learning that I've done on my own through books and the internet and whatnot, I've always worked in layers, and that's how the classical masters and the Dutch masters used to paint, was in several layers. So this is how I paint. So when I started later on painting in pastels, that just naturally carried over, and I just find it's the easiest way to paint is by building layers. Some artists paint in tiny little sections, completely finishing one section before moving on. I don't do that. As you see, I'm kind of all over the place, but that's because I work in layers, and while I have a pencil out, I'll use that color where I see I need it. And then sometimes I keep going back and forth between the darks and the lights, just adjusting. Either I'm adjusting my values, or I need to overlap some hairs, overlap some darker ones over lighter ones, and vice versa. So I'm always alternating pencils, and I've always got a lot of action happening on that paper. So now I'm building my lights and just penciling in some little darker hairs in there, but I'm going to keep building my lights. I had the cream carbothello pencil, and at the very end I'll layer white over top of that, and it's just going to make everything pop and brighten everything up a little bit more. And I'll make everything look rounder too, because you've got the brightest white sticking out in the front, and as you go further down the muzzle, those darker colors will help to round out and give curvature. See how everything is already starting to pop more now that I'm using the pure white over top of the cream color and everything else underneath. And now the muzzle is already feeling a lot rounder on this side. And again, I'm just making little adjustments here, fine tuning as I go along. Just put down a little lighter area beneath the eye. I'm using my dark brown pencil again here, just still adjusting. I want to make sure I maintain some of those dark areas. I don't want to lose those little dark spots that kind of poke through underneath the fur. I'm using a General's pencil here. It's a beige colored pencil. It's pretty much the same color that I have with the Caran d'Ache. I just like the very fine point that I have with it. That's why I'm using it just on the bridge of the nose. I did feel it was easier to get the tiny little marks that I wanted rather than the Caran d'Ache. The Caran d'Ache, even if I can get the fine point, because it's softer for some reason, I'm not getting as fine a line as I am with the Generals. When I work around the eye like this, my hairs are a little bit longer, so I want to make sure that my strokes are longer. And the hairs curve downwards as you get closer down to the eye. And I just went in with the lighter beige pencil here right away. And then we'll be layering cream color as well as white over top of that later. And again, following the direction of the hairs, they curve up and then they start gently sloping and curving downwards. And I want to try and get a little bit of a deep burnt sienna in here. And I'm covering it up with a darker color, but you'll still be able to see just a hint of rust color when all is said and done. Now I'm outlining the top part of the ear with a darker pencil, a brown pencil. And then some black over top of this, just to intensify the color. Just have to keep adjusting all the time. I'm continually going around looking for things, and if something catches my attention, I need to fix it right away. That's just the way I work. If I leave it, I might forget it, and then the painting's gone, and I'm like, oh my God, I let that painting go, and there's a big boo boo in there. So I like to fix things as soon as I see them. I know it might sound a little bit ADD, but it's just if I don't get to it right away, I'll forget it. So I like to get things done and out of the way as soon as I spot them. Now I just put a few little nicks under the eye. There are a couple of little hairs there, so I just want to make sure I get those in. Not too many, just a few little hairs. The hairs are a little bit longer down as you go down on the cheek, so I want to make sure my strokes are longer and they curve. And there's kind of a little pattern here that I'm trying to maintain. There's texture, so I want to make sure that I get that texture in there so that it looks as natural as possible. The way I'm getting that texture in there is I'm laying down my strokes and going across as a line, and then I'm working below or above, again going across in a line, but not completely going over what I have previously done. This way it kind of leaves little lines of texture in there. So I'm just adjusting my lighter hairs. So I'm going to speed it up just a little bit It's just another layer, the same as we've done before, only lighter. I'm using the cream colored Carbothello pencil. And as I get closer to the eye, the strokes are a little bit shorter and they get longer as I go up above on the brow. And we're not going to paint in the whiskers yet. It's too soon. At this point, I wasn't sure if I would paint the background still, so I decided to wait for the whiskers. I usually wait till the very end before putting down the whiskers anyway. It's just better that way. And now I'm going to come in with a lighter layer under the eye. And now I'm going to use my white pencil on top of the cream colored pencil. It looks a lot brighter on here. It's not as bright in person. It's just the camera intensifies whites. So I'm not going to put the white everywhere, just in random spots, just a hair here and there. Just scatter them around. And I'm speeding this up just a little bit here, just to twice the speed. Just so that we don't get bogged down in boredom from watching me paint one little hair at a time. So it's the same as we've been doing, following the direction of the hairs and just going lighter as we build our layers. And I'm making sure I keep some of the pattern in the hair here and the texture. So there's folds on the side of the head and the temples, so I'm just making sure I keep those little folds. And now I'm going to use Pastels, and I'm using a lighter color. It's like a creamy white. The name of the color itself is Raw Umber Tint. So it's almost a white. It's just a creamy white. This little area is going to be nearly white, so I'm just going to go in right away and just lay down the lighter color. I'm just going to rub it in there. I want to make sure that layer is really thin so that I can work over top of it. And now I'm using a darker color on the bottom, and this is helping me shadow that area, and it's giving me my curved shape as well. And I'm going to lay down some more raw umber, just get more of that underpainting in there before I proceed to painting that side of the face. Unfortunately, it's a little bit low in the camera range there. The camera seems to have missed the bottom part. Hopefully we don't lose any of our screen as I'm working. I'm just going to mark down my darker areas again, as I've done previously in the earlier stages of the painting. So I'm just blocking things in here, just blocking in my darker areas with my brown pencil. And then we'll build our lighter colors on top of that after. Now I'm just going to go and keep blocking in with my pen pastels. Some of the bottom part is out of the camera range, unfortunately. My apologies for that. Again, I want to make sure that the layer of pan pastels I'm using to block in the rest is thin so that I can keep building other layers over top. I'm just going to start lightening some of the layers on the chin using a pale gray pencil. And again, I apologize, it's kind of out of camera range here. And I paid close attention too when I was setting my zoom on the camera. It was all in range on my screen on the camera as I was looking. Okay, so here I have a warm gray or my beige pencil, and I'm just putting down another layer on here. It's a little bit lighter than the previous layer. I'm going to just start gradually lightening it up, so I'm not going to my lightest pencils yet. I just want to make sure my little stripe there is dark enough. So I'm just going to correct that. It's a gray pencil. I'm just making little marks. Just going to make it a little bit darker. I don't want it too light. And now I can go back in with a lighter color with my cream colored pencil. I sure use that cream colored pencil a lot. You'll find that when you work, as you work more and more, there will be certain colors that you tend to gravitate to. That will be a mainstay in your palette. And for me, my cream colored Carbothello and the darker cream Conte, those are two of those staple colors for me. Especially painting animals. If you're painting cream colored animals, yellow animals, by yellow I mean like something like a yellow lab or a golden retriever, or any like sandy colored animal, you're going to be working with a lot of beiges, golds, and creams. And I'm just going to speed this up a bit as I'm painting the hairs, just so I don't bore you guys with all this tedious stuff of just putting down little lines. But again, on the cheek, it's the same principle. I'm layering colors, going from dark to lightest, And as I go down on the cheeks, so do the hairs. They also go downwards, they're growing downwards, and there's some longer hairs, so make sure you get those in, as well as the texture. Some of those longer hairs are not even with a previous layer, so you just want to make sure you recreate that. There are wispy hairs that stick out of this guy's cheek. And here I'm just trying to create folds. The darker areas represent folds in the fur, so we're going to keep those areas darker while layering hairs around. And again, there's that darn camera range. There's not much below the chin, it's just a bit of the neck. Basically below the chin, I've been doing exactly as I've done throughout the painting. It's just layering hairs. They're longer hairs because they're on the neck, and it's just going from dark to light. And I'm using a gold colored pencil here. And now back to the cream, just making a few adjustments there, and then back to the cream here. So again, on this part of the muzzle, I'm just going to lay down short cream colored hairs, overlapping over the other hairs that I've already laid down on the bottom part of his cheek. And that gradual transition from dark to light is giving us our round shape and definition, as well as a shadow area. And then once the cream is laid down, I'll go over that with my bright white, and then everything's going to really pop. So again, you don't want your hairs being too uniform. You want them kind of crisscrossing and overlapping, and not just straight patches of hair, because then it will not look natural. And you want to kind of see straggly little hairs as you go towards the inside of the nostril. You don't want like a straight line. You want to see individual little hairs here and there. If you put too many, don't be afraid to just take out your black pencil and just put little black marks just to recreate some black lines or black definition in between your hairs. And here I'm using my darker cream Conte pencil. Because the camera just flashes the white so brightly, you might be wondering why I'm using that color, because it kind of looks the same on the screen, on the monitor, but it's really not the same. When I'm looking at it in person, it really is a couple of shades darker actually than my cream colored Carbothello. So there is purpose to my madness. What you see on the screen on a monitor is not always exactly the way it looks in real life. So now I'm just going to go down and keep blocking in up there. I've got my reddish brown pencil. And I'm just going to speed this up just to twice the speed. That just gave me a nice little pop of color in that area, a nice gradual change in color. So you don't want to neglect little things like that. I'm going to lighten up those areas. Again, going in the direction of the hairs, and these are longer hairs. And we're trying to make sure that we maintain the texture here. These hairs would be a lot smoother looking if this was not the anthracite paper, but because it's the anthracite paper and it's so grainy, I'm not liking how these hairs are not really smooth. They're a little too grainy for my taste, as I mentioned before. So it's hard to get that soft quality that I usually like to get with my work. But overall, it still turned out to be a good painting, so I'm pretty satisfied. The anthracite colored pastel matte would probably be excellent for a landscape painting because of the rough texture. You would be able to layer more pastel sticks over top of it and really get nice texture and build up a lot of layers in a landscape painting. So I think in landscape painting it would be excellent. But for fine details like this, I prefer the other colors of pastel matte, the ones that are a lot smoother and have less texture to the paper. I'm just adding my pure white layer here with my pure white pastel pencil. And now I'm going back up on top and I'm just going to start detailing with a little bit of the cream color. Just little nicks here and there. Just add a little pop of light. Not everywhere, just in random spots. Just little nicks. And now with a gray pencil, I'm just going to start making tiny little marks, making little fine hairs on the chin. These are easy to make. I was able to get my pencil sharpened to a nice point. Somebody did recommend a sharpener to me and I ordered one. I finally got it in a few days ago and it's really good. I really like it for sharpening my Caran d'Ache pencils. It's not perfect. Caran d'Ache is just easy to break, as I mentioned before. So I am still breaking some, which makes me cringe every single time because darn, they cost me a pretty penny. Every time I sharpen one and it breaks, I just want to cry. They really were expensive when I ordered them last year. You can get them cheaper now on Amazon, but at the time I ordered them, Amazon was not that much cheaper, so I just bought them from a local art store. I will leave information about the sharpener in the description, but it's a good sharpener. It's called a Dolly. I think it's pronounced Dolly, Dahle, and it's a professional sharpener. It's not expensive at all. It's a hand crank sharpener. It's still tricky to use. The mount is far from perfect, and every once in a while I still do break my Caran d'Ache pencils, but at least I'm able to get a sharp point with them, and I am breaking them less often than I was breaking them before. All my other sharpeners did not sharpen them. They kept breaking them, so I had to resort to using a box cutter or an X-Acto knife, and they would still break every once in a while, or they would break way too often. With the sharpener, they're not breaking as often. I'm still breaking some. I'm starting to learn when it starts getting too easy to sharpen to just stop because at that point they'll break. So when I feel resistance, I can keep going, but as soon as it starts getting easy to sharpen, I just stop and it saves my pencils. So it's a whole new learning curve to try and learn how to properly use it without breaking my pencils. So again, on the chin here is just a process of layering hairs from dark to light. And I started with the gray and built up my layers, and now I'm using the cream colored pencil. And these are longer hairs and they're going in different directions, more towards the right of the screen. His left chin, the right of your screen, they're going towards your right, and on the other sides, they're growing towards the left. With these hairs, you want to make sure you see the definition in them because they really detail the chin. And you want to make sure you have just a few little scraggly hairs going up over the lip. And now I'm just going to go straight with my pure white over top of what we've already done just to brighten everything up. And I'm going to speed up the clip just a bit. And so now in this little section under the chin, there are tiny little wispy hairs growing. So I want to make sure I get that texture down right. So I just want to follow the direction of the hairs and just make tiny little marks just to get that variation in the texture. Get some folds in there and some lighter sections. So I'm just going to keep going around with my cream colored pencil, and I'm just going to build up that texture in that layer, those layers. And with my gray pencil under the neck, I want to make sure I add a little bit of cool tones just to make it obvious it's a shadowed area. And I'm using a lighter gray pencil here to detail the lighter colored hairs. I'm using a warmer gray here as I'm going up. And this allows me to have a transition between the cool and the warm tones. Now I can go back up with my cream colored pencil and just start lightening up those layers up on top. And again, following the direction of the hair, they're longer strokes, they're curving downwards. I want to make sure I don't cover that little dark patch on the cheek because that gives our cheek definition. So I want to make sure I leave that there. Even though I will paint little hairs in there, I want to make sure that overall it still looks brown. And I want to just keep building that first layer of fur over top of my base layer. And it's still the warm gray pencil. And I want to make sure I maintain some of the darker areas as well. So I'll just fine tune those, just tweak it a little bit. These little darker strokes will give us some definition and texture in our fur. Now I'm going to use a larger sponge because it's such a larger area. It wouldn't make sense to just use my little eye makeup sponge to apply the pan pastels. So I'm going to take out a makeup sponge, and again, you can just get that at a drugstore, department store, and they're a lot cheaper than buying sponges from an art store. So you're able to cover a much wider area with this. I'm just quickly scribbling in some dark brown here, and this will help give us definition to our fur as we layer lighter colors over top of this after. Now I'm going to go back to this section and start working on finishing this area. Getting some definition to our hairs, maintaining our darker areas. And I want to make sure I don't lose my darker patches, and I'm just intensifying it with some black pencil. There's a lot of texture in that little section between the face and the ear and the neck. There's folds, there's changes in the direction of the hairs, there's various lengths in the hair, so I want to make sure I pay attention to that and I'm mindful of that as I paint those areas. So I'm going to the top of the ear and I'm just going to start laying down some hair. And this is my beige pencil again. And the hair on the ears are longer, so I'm going to make longer strokes. And I want to keep some of the darker color that's underneath because this will give us definition in our ear. So I want to make sure I don't completely cover it. Even though I am going over some areas, some of the darker areas, I'm not going to completely cover them up. The edge of the ear has a darker section, so I want to make sure I get that in. And again, I will be going over that darker section with lighter hairs, but I won't completely cover it up. The hairs on this side of the ear are a lot shorter, so be mindful of that. So again, I'm just using my warmer gray pencil and just laying down little hairs, and they get longer in the middle of the ear and they grow outwards. Some will curve and some will curve one way and others the other way. So just be mindful always of your hairs and the direction they grow in. Now, looking at my reference, I see just a hint of rust color or burnt sienna color. So I just want to get a few marks in there just to get a hint of that color. I'll be going over it, but you'll still see some of it poking through, just as on the side of the temple. It's the same principle. Even though I'll be layering over top, you'll still see some of that color showing through, but without it being too bold. Now my hairs are overlapping the darker sections, but I'm making sure I don't completely cover up the darker parts. I just want it to look natural. There's always hairs overlapping. They don't end perfectly. They're various lengths. So I'm just being mindful of all these things as I paint the hair. Now I could paint in those delicate little hairs on his temple using my gold pencil, and they're just shorter marks. And I'm going over that reddish color that I previously laid down. So everything is going to blend together. The red's not going to be so intense. And now I'm being mindful of that variation in texture and those little folds, and making sure I keep some darker sections in between the lighter sections. And this is helping to give us texture. I'll speed this up just a little bit here as it's very repetitive at this point. So I'm making sure these little hairs are short strokes because they're not long hairs over here. So I just want to make sure I maintain my texture and keep it as natural looking as possible. So the hairs on top of the back are a lot shorter and they get longer as you go down, but I want to make sure I just keep short strokes here. And now I'm back in on my ear with my warmer gray pencil. It's not exactly beige. It's not, it's more of a French gray, a warm French gray. I want to make sure that some of the hairs that I draw in here, they're curving and they're pointing in the other direction, and some will curve downwards. And here I'm just making some little curves in the hair at this point. You don't want them all uniform. And so you can see here, even though I'm going over the darker sections with a lighter colored pencil, I'm still going to maintain that darker tone underneath. Once the whole painting is done, you'll still see a darker section there. And now I'm going to lay down some lighter colored hairs with my cream Conte pencil. So I'll speed this up just a little bit as I keep layering the lighter colored hairs. And as I keep adding these lighter colored hairs, you can see how the texture is starting to have even more definition. Now that I've added some of the cream colored pencil in the ear, you could start seeing how the light is being built up. You can actually see light being reflected on those hairs now. I'm making sure those little hairs are just tiny little bits, just small nicks, small strokes. And now I'm going even lighter with the Carbothello, adding even more light on those hairs. And I'm just going to polish up those tiny little hairs on the edge of the ear. Just adding a few more longer hairs, giving more definition. Touching up my darker area underneath. Now I'm continuing the hairs on the neck and back. And this is the gold pencil is one shade lighter than the previous gold pencil that I used. So it's more of like a mustard color. Just keep going a shade lighter each time and you'll be fine. So again, just short little hairs. I'm going to add a little bit of the reddish brown in there. I just want more of a reddish tinge. I see a bit of a reddish tinge when I look at my reference photo. So I'm just going to go ahead and pencil that in really rough. I'm just doodling that in, just scribbling and not really paying attention. As long as I'm going in the general direction that the hairs are going in, I'm fine. If you're going to paint this, you can probably go ahead with a dark brown if you have it in the pan pastels, or a reddish brown. Just you'd be fine going darker than what I laid down the base layer with. Again, I'm just scribbling that brown in there. I'm not really paying attention to anything perfect at this point. I just want to scribble in some darker. As you paint these, you could probably put little hairs here and there, just curving in different directions, just to give a bit more interest and texture to your fur. And notice how they're growing downwards on this section. And I'm going to speed this up quite a little bit more since it's just so repetitive. It's going to lull you to sleep. So I'm just going to start adding some lighter hairs. Again, just building up the colors. With this cream colored pencil here, as I'm going down the back, I don't want it everywhere, just in certain sections where I want highlights and nothing more. And as we get down to the bottom of the cougar, there will be more definition in where the shoulder is beginning. You could kind of see a difference in color right here. So it'll be lighter there. I'm going to make it lighter in this section, and then just try and keep a bit of definition and some shapes and texture as you layer down the lighter color. You don't want it anywhere. I mean everywhere. Like right here, I'm just adding little patterns, following the direction, and it's just creating variation in the hair, variations in texture. And you get the sense now as I'm building up lighter colors on the bottom, just that one little section where the shoulder starts and the neck kind of meets the shadowed area, you could tell that it's in brighter light. So I'm just touching up some parts, just making sure I add a bit of highlights here and there, just fine tuning. I'm just adding final little highlights in certain areas. So it's just pretty much double checking my work and just correcting little things that I want to correct as I go along. It's nothing major. I'm just adding a bit more light. And I'm going to do the same up top of our Cougar. So again, it's just tweaking things, just adjusting things, adjusting little hairs. Maybe I want a little bit more light in certain areas. Correcting my eye here, just adjusting everything. You might not need to do this on your Cougar while you're working on it. I just wanted to make some little adjustments. And I might still make adjustments now that it's completed. Like I said earlier, I'll look at it for a couple of days and I might adjust a little thing here and there. Nothing that's really noticeable to other people maybe, but just to me, if something's bugging me on the painting, I will go ahead and fix it even days later. Sometimes even a few weeks later, if I still have the painting in the house, then I'll still go ahead and fix it. So it's just minor adjustments. If you notice, I have my paper taped right down to my desk just so it doesn't lift as I'm working on it. Otherwise, it was lifting and it would be irritating to see this paper moving all the time as I'm drawing on it. And I also always leave a little edge around my pastel mat, around my painting. And I only use painter's tape with the Clairefontaine pastel mat. I do not use masking tape. Masking tape is a lot stickier than painter's tape. I used masking tape one time on Clairefontaine pastel mat and it kind of lifted the edge a bit, a corner. You see, pastel mat has a cellulose layer on top of paper, so that cellulose layer can separate if you pull on it somehow. And so because masking tape is really sticky, it can actually lift that cellulose layer off of the paper, and you don't want that because then you'll have a compromised painting. You'll have a compromised painting surface. So use painter's tape. It does the job. It keeps your paper in place while you're working. You're able to have a nice clean edge. I always leave about maybe a quarter of an inch, sometimes half an inch, but rarely, usually just a quarter of an inch. And then it's easy to peel off and it doesn't pull off the cellulose. And now I'm going to paint in my background. I wasn't going to. I was going to leave it just with the dark gray anthracite, but I didn't really like it. I felt that it looked too dull. My Cougar just didn't stand out enough. So I'm going to paint it different shades of greens and browns. So I started off with this dark green here. I wasn't really sure at first. I thought I would want it more of a dark, deep green, but I kind of changed my mind as I was going and I wanted it more of a brownish olive green with some reddish tones in there. So we'll cover that up after. So I'm basically just using pastel sticks, and with the pastel sticks I work with them flat down and I just lay down my color and I push down really hard on my pastel mat just to really blend everything in together. And if a color is too light, don't be afraid to use black and then cover the black with another color. It just helps to deepen tones and make everything nice and rich. And I just used a combination of olive green after this, as well as a lighter green color, browns, a burnt sienna color, and black, and that's it. And just no rhyme or reason to it. I'm just laying down patches of color and just really working them and blending them together. And this is kind of giving me the illusion of having a forest behind. So it's just a nice soft blended background, and because of the tones, the Cougar stands out more than just the dark gray anthracite. You can leave the anthracite if you do like it, if you do like the color. I just personally prefer a nice background. And so I'm just going to alternate between colors, between greens and browns, and just blend everything in together. Use whatever pastel sticks you have. I'm using Rembrandt's, but whatever you have is fine. And if you want to make yours a different color, make it a different color. You could have it all black, you could have it blue, red, whatever. This is going to be your painting, so maybe push your boundaries and see how creative you can get with your own background. I'd be interested to see what kind of backgrounds you guys could come up with. I'm using more black towards the bottom and keeping it darker because this is helping to give me depth in my painting. If it's lighter up on top, it gives the illusion of distance, and so I want to have this in this piece. I want to make it look like the bottom is closer to you than the top part. So the top part is in the distance and the bottom is closer. So it could be grass, it could be something else, who knows? It's all blurred out, but it just makes the painting more interesting this way. And I will be going over my lines a little bit, and that's okay. I'll just go over everything after it's all done, and I'll just pencil in little hairs here and there, and it's going to fix everything. And I want a bit more brown in there, just deepen it a bit. I'm still going to keep it lighter, but I still want a bit more brown and a bit more reddish tones. And don't be afraid to push down really hard with your fingers when you blend. If you don't want to dirty your fingers, you can use gloves, latex gloves. I personally don't like them. But don't be afraid to push down hard. And I'm just making those marks. I'm using an up and down motion rather than sideways. And then just really blending it. So I lay down my pastel stick flat and I just make up and down motions, except for here I went sideways. Of course it happens just as I'm talking about it. But for the most part, most of the strokes were just up and down strokes. And if your fingers are really dirty and you want to clean them, you could use baby wipes. I always keep baby wipes in my studio, especially for when I work with pastels. They're really good for cleaning the pastel off the fingers. Once I'm done, I wash with bar soap also. But the baby wipes are excellent for keeping your fingers clean as you work. And now I'm just going to fix my outline. Fix my little hairs. And now the scary part, we're going to pencil in those whiskers. And because it's the anthracite color and it's a lot grainier, it's going to be a lot harder to get a really smooth stroke. So I kind of twist my pencil as I go. Not here, here I'm just fixing little hairs. But when I do my whiskers, I kind of spin my pencil as I go, and this picks up less pastel. And by picking up less pastel, I mean the pastel that's already on my paper. Your pencil will pick that up, especially if you have thick layers. So by twisting it, you're picking up less of it. That way, when you lay down your pencil on the paper for the second time, you're not going to contaminate your colors. And I'm just correcting my little hairs here before I continue with my whiskers, because once the whiskers are in, it's a little trickier to get in between those to make any corrections. And now back to my whiskers, and I'm just pushing that pencil out. So I'm going to use a combination of both my white pencil here as well as a very, very pale yellow, just to add more light to my whiskers. If I just use white, it's going to be boring, but by using that very pale yellow, this one here, it just adds a bit of warmth and light to my whisker. And it's very hard because of the anthracite color. It's a very grainy paper, and it gives me a hard time as I'm trying to make these really fine lines. Even with a fine point on my pencil, it's a little hard to get the super fine line that you can get with other pastel matte colors. I'm going to go on this side of the face, and that came out a lot thicker than what I wanted, but that's because of the grainy paper. So I'm not fond of it for the fine hairs. But what can you do? Got to finish the painting, and our cat needs whiskers. And it can be scary to draw whiskers, but just do it. Going quick is often the best option rather than going slowly. If you go slowly, you might get jagged, crooked lines. So if you go quickly, you'll usually get that nice smooth line, except when you're working with a really grainy paper, of course. Pay attention to the direction the whiskers are going in also. Some of them curve and some of them will overlap. And we also don't want to neglect the whiskers up on top of the head. So make sure you get those down. And there are some tiny, delicate little whiskers on the chin as well that extend past the chin and onto the background. So make sure you get those in. They don't really show up that much on the camera, but just try and make sure you get those in also. Don't neglect those. That's all part of having realistic details. And here's our final painting. And see how much richer it looks from the recording? The recording just brightens up the white so much you don't really get an accurate depiction of the true colors that are in a painting. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If I missed anything or didn't explain something properly, please don't be shy and let me know in the comments if you have a question. Somebody else might have the exact same question, so it might be helping someone else as well. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.